Have you ever wondered where you might be in your spiritual awakening process? Not knowing where you are can leave you feeling stuck, doubting yourself, or missing out on the growth that's right in front of you. I've seen it with myself and with every client that I've worked with. So in this video, I'll break down the 9 phases of awakening and go over the signs of each one so you can spot exactly where you are. Let's start with the very first phase. Before an awakening, most of us don't even realize that we're asleep. Life looks fine on the outside, right? You're doing the things you're supposed to do, you're working, you're chasing goals, you're building an identity that fits with society says is important. You wake up, you go to work, you talk about the weekend, you scroll on your phone, crash into bed, and then do it all over again the next day. And it feels normal, right? Because everyone else is doing the same thing. You know, you got your routines, you have your habits, you know, maybe you have some comforts. But if you're honest, it's hollow. And deep down, something feels missing. Even if you can't exactly put it into words, you feel restless, you don't feel completely fulfilled or happy. You've built an identity, a career, a relationship, a lifestyle, but when you look in the mirror, it feels like a costume. This is the sleepwalker phase. It's not that you're doing life wrong, so to say. It's just that you're on autopilot. You're living out a script that you didn't write. And for most people, this is where life begins and it ends. But if you're here watching this video, chances are that the cracks have already started to appear. If you find yourself in this part of awakening, you will feel like life is on autopilot, even though it looks normal from the outside. You will notice an emptiness underneath the roles, routines, or achievements, and you will distract yourself constantly because silence or stillness feels very uncomfortable. But what happens when that quiet restlessness starts to grow? So this is the moment where the whisper inside you gets louder and louder. You start noticing that what once felt safe now feels suffocating. You reach a goal, maybe it's the promotion, the relationship, the milestone you thought would finally fulfill you. And instead of joy, you actually feel emptiness. And you can't explain it to anyone because on the outside, everything looks fine. Everything looks maybe even perfect. But on the inside, something is unraveling and you start to question things. I remember when I first started to feel this. I was in a 9-to-5 job. I was with a partner. I was living in a certain city, but inside of me, there was this quiet discomfort. You know, conversations felt shallow, my values weren't lining up, the environment in which I was living didn't fully feel right, and I would find myself lying awake at night thinking, is this it? Like, is this really all there is? And in this second phase of awakening, the cracks begin to appear. And these cracks you feel are not depression and they are not burnout. They're the first signs of awakening disguised as unease. And once they appear, you can't unsee them. If you're in this part of awakening, you will feel restless or dissatisfied even when everything looks fine externally. You will catch yourself asking, is this it? You know, is this all there is? And you will sense that certain relationships, jobs, or goals suddenly feel hollow. But there comes a moment when that quiet unease turns into something you can't ignore, which brings me to the third phase of awakening. By the way, I created a free quiz for you that you can take to find out which phase of awakening you're in and what you can do to progress through it successfully. It's linked in the description below. So in the second phase of awakening, the cracks begin to appear in the foundation. And in the third phase, something actually shatters. Maybe it's a breakup, it's a loss, a health scare, a huge unexpected revelation, but suddenly the world doesn't look the same anymore. The beliefs you once held, they don't feel like yours anymore. You realize they were borrowed. The systems you trusted, politics, religion, relationships, everything begins to look shaky, and you realize that the ground you were standing on was actually built on sand. And this stage is disorienting, it's terrifying, it's liberating, and this third stage of awakening is the shake-up. It feels like the rug is pulled from underneath you, and for the first time you're seeing not with your eyes, but with your soul. And many people describe this phase as a veil being lifted, or to use a very common example from a movie, it's like being in the Matrix where you have a choice between a blue and a red pill, and you actually decide to take the red pill and you decide to see reality for what it is. And in this third phase of awakening, you can also expect to experience synchronicities. Maybe you keep seeing the same numbers, or a random book falls off a shelf that speaks directly to what you're going through, but you start to feel like reality itself is alive and like it's speaking directly to you. I will never forget when I was going through this phase, because I would get these crazy signs everywhere, like the universe was trying to get my attention. And at first I thought that I was, going crazy and maybe I was seeing into things too much. But then I realized, no, this was actually clarity, and life was actually communicating with me. If you're in this part of awakening, you will experience a catalyst, a crisis, betrayal, loss, or sudden shift that changes everything. You will see synchronicities and signs everywhere, as if reality itself is speaking to you. And you will feel both terrified and liberated, because your old identity can't survive anymore. After everything you thought you knew crumbles, you've left with a burning need to make sense of it all, and that's when you enter the fourth phase. Once you've woken up, you can't unknow what you know, and you can't unsee what now you're seeing. And so begins one of the most exhausting but also exhilarating phases of awakening. This is when you binge YouTube videos at 3 a.m. You're trying to understand what you're going through. You order piles of books, you journal, you meditate, you pray, you dive into different practices, you dive into astrology, energy work, sound healing, start working with a coach, anything that might give you answers. You're hungry because the old life has fallen apart and you desperately need a new framework to understand what's happening. This phase is the seeker's obsession. And this is beautiful because your curiosity is alive again. But it's also slightly dangerous because here the ego can sneak back dressed in so-called spiritual robes. So you start labeling yourself. I'm a starseed, I'm a chosen one, I'm a twin flame, I'm enlightened, I'm a spiritual seeker. You start to collect practices and rituals like trophies, and sometimes you start to look down on people who are still asleep or who are not as spiritual. And I've seen this in myself, and I see it with clients all the time. We think we're becoming enlightened, so to say, but sometimes we're just swapping one identity for another. So in this phase, make sure you don't spiritually bypass important lessons and you keep focusing on the work that you need to do. Don't judge and don't look down on those who are not as spiritual as you. Just because you are awake and you have all this awareness and insight now, doesn't mean you're better than anyone else who's still asleep. That's really just the trick of the ego. And this seeker phase is necessary, but it's not the destination, it's actually a bridge. If you're in this part of awakening, you will feel obsessed with finding answers and consuming information. You will jump from practice to practice, hoping one will fix everything. You have a risk of slipping into spiritual ego or superiority without realizing it. But collecting knowledge can only take you so far. At some point, you're called to go even deeper, and the fifth phase is where the real work begins. This is the part that most people don't want to talk about, because once the seeker energy burns itself out, that's where the real work begins. Everything you buried, the shame, the anger, the grief, the childhood wounds, the trauma, it all comes up rushing to the surface. And suddenly your emotions feel out of control. One minute you're fine, and then the next minute you're sobbing in your car or raging at someone you love. It's very chaotic, so to say. And in this phase, you are facing yourself and you are purging. And it doesn't just stop there. Your body joins into this experience as well. You're exhausted all the time, no matter how much you sleep, or you actually can't sleep at all. You're tossing, you're turning, you have nightmares. You wake up at 2 in the morning on repeat. Some of you will notice also drastic changes in your digestion. Foods that you've always tolerated suddenly upset your system because your body is literally digesting old trauma, old emotions, lifetime of suppression and different wounds. When I went through this specific phase, I felt like I was falling apart. I couldn't control my emotions. I couldn't explain what was happening to me. And I thought maybe I was broken, or, I felt like I was losing my mind and going crazy. I felt like I couldn't handle all of these wounds and all of the different things that I was realizing about myself. But this is the purging stage. And this is also where the dark night of the soul happens. You are shedding everything that is fake, shallow, inauthentic, and yes, it's painful and it hurts, but this is the storm that makes space for the real you. If you're in this part of awakening, you will experience overwhelming emotions that feel uncontrollable or chaotic. You will face physical symptoms like exhaustion, insomnia, or digestive issues. And you will believe at times that you're losing it or you're going crazy when in fact you're purging. And as all that old pain rises to the surface, a new struggle appears, not with your emotions, but with your own resistance to change. As the purging unfolds, your ego will fight it because it will want to cling to routines, old identities, and attachments, and it's going to whisper, "This isn't real, you're going crazy. Go back to a safe life, stop overthinking." Doubt and fear are going to show up very, very strong, and you may feel like you are losing grip with reality. But eventually, something shifts. You realize that you just can't fight this process anymore. You can't control it. And that's when surrender happens. It doesn't happen as a big decision, but it happens as a soft letting go. And I remember sitting one night completely exhausted from crying. I think I had been crying for an hour trying to fix myself, and I just broke down because I was so fed up with everything. And once I calmed down, I said to myself, fine, I'm gonna stop fighting this. I have no other choice. And in that moment, the tiniest seed of peace entered. And that's what surrender feels like. It's not victory, it's not defeat, it's just this very soft release and surrender. If you're in this part of the awakening, you will feel yourself pulled between wanting control and wanting relief. You will question whether you're making it all up, and then you'll feel exhausted by that battle. And you will finally soften into moments of surrender, which bring surprising peace. Once you finally surrender, you're ready to go into the next phase. After the storm, there finally comes silence. This phase often feels very anticlimactic. You're calmer, you're not, chasing answers anymore. But at the same time, you don't know what's next. It's like the air has gone still, but you're standing in a very unfamiliar landscape. Some people call this the void. It's like a hermit mode where your system is recovering from everything that had happened during your awakening. And you may feel lost or even bored, but this is where healing integrates. This is where you stop performing spirituality and you actually start embodying it, and you start embodying all the lessons that you learned during your awakening. You are in the integration phase, and at the same time, you're in the void. So this phase, as I like to call it, is the void and integration. When I came out of my own, purging and dark night of the soul, I actually spent more than a year in this void and integration stage. I didn't have any goals, I had no motivations, I didn't know what's next, but I did feel much more calm and rooted and grounded. It was very uncomfortable, but it was okay, because integration is not about doing, it's about being. And if you're in this part of the awakening, you will feel calmer, but you may also think you're stuck or lost. You will notice you're less obsessed with seeking and more at peace with simple presence. And you will experience deep rest, like your system is recovering after an intense marathon. As you settle into this quiet stillness, something subtle and extraordinary starts to happen. Slowly, things begin to shift again. Your consciousness expands in ways you can't unsee. Time starts to feel different and it feels less linear. Synchronicities happen all the time, but now you don't chase them. They just kind of flow like a normal, regular part of life. This is also where your intuition sharpens and you sense things before they happen. Sometimes you know what someone's about to say, or you feel their emotions before they speak. Dreams can also become much more instructional or vivid, and energetic downloads arrive not really as thoughts, but as a sudden knowing. It can feel strange at first, but over time it becomes natural. And this is not about being a fortune teller, so to say. It's about perceiving reality in its multi-layered fullness. And it makes your decisions more intentional, because you can sense the ripple effects. You can sense what a decision feels like. If you're in this part of the awakening, you will experience sharper intuition and just knowing things without logic. You will notice synchronicities happening frequently and naturally, and you will feel like time is less linear and more like overlapping possibilities. And once you've learned to trust your intuition and experience reality on new levels, you're ready for the final phase. In this ninth and final phase, you start to feel less separate from the world. The tree, the stranger on the street, the silence between your thoughts, it's all one movement. Compassion flows more naturally, control relaxes into participation, and you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to perform. In 2019, when I was 21 years old, I did my first ever ayahuasca ceremony. And that's exactly what I felt during the ceremony. This indescribable unity and connection. I was looking at the trees, I was feeling the grass, I was looking at the fellow people around me, and I just kept crying and crying and crying out of love and understanding, because I finally got it. I finally understood this great connection in life and in the world, that everything was one and we were all one. And I only did ayahuasca that one time, but after my awakening, this is the exact same feeling that I had. I felt that at the end of this challenging experience, I actually saw the unity, the lessons, and everyone and everything as one. But here's the important part. Awakening doesn't end here. You don't get a diploma that says, congrats, you're done with your awakening. Awakening comes in cycles. You revisit old rooms, so to say, but each time you do that, you bring more light and you experience those rooms differently. You walk into them differently, because life is going to keep testing you, but you will meet those tests with more grounding and more trust. I still face challenges. I still have moments of fear, doubt, and grief. But the difference now is that I don't get swallowed by them. I don't identify with them. They move through me and I remain grounded and anchored in myself. And that's what this path gives you. Not perfection, not bliss 24/7, but presence, wholeness, and the ability to live life without running away from yourself. If you're in this part of the awakening, you will experience natural compassion and a sense of connection with all things. You will notice less need to control life and more trust in how it unfolds. And you will also understand that awakening is ongoing, with cycles that bring deeper growth. If you want to find out which phase of awakening you're in and what you can do to progress through it successfully, you can take my 2-minute quiz. It's going to be linked in the description below. Here's the thing. As you awaken, you become far more sensitive to the energy around you, and that can leave you feeling drained, drained, overwhelmed, or even anxious when you're around other people. If you want to know how to protect your spiritual energy and stay grounded no matter what's happening around you, watch this video next where I teach you a powerful practice to keep your energy strong and protected.